What's up, everybody? It's Frederick Douglass Bussey back with another edition of the Power Lunch podcast. I'm your host, of course, Frederick Douglass Bussey, and we've got a great guest today. We're going to have a great conversation talking about all things uh, around growing a business and building culture. Our guest today has built a seven-figure business where she is also working with founders to help them to be able to install great culture, to be able to attract great talent and things of that nature that can allow them to be able to scale. This will be a great episode for you if you are looking to do the same thing. With that being said, if you are watching this on Facebook or YouTube, make sure you follow, like, subscribe. On LinkedIn, follow us as well. Make sure that you're liking us and you're following so you get notifications for all the great content that we're creating here at Icon Status. Also, those of you who are watching this for the first time, we are sponsored by none other than the Seven Figure Circle $1 Million Mastermind, a free Facebook group for six-figure and seven-figure entrepreneurs who want to grow their businesses to seven figures and beyond. So if that sounds like you, then this is the place for you to be. Make sure you head over to my profile and join the Seven Figure Circle $1 Million Mastermind. The link is in the description below. As always, we're also sponsored by my book, Breaking Orbit, Rip Out of the Regular by Unearthing the Power Within. It's available on Amazon as well for those of you who are great leaders and entrepreneurs who want to discover your superpower and be able to tap in to create limitless possibilities in your business and in your life. That being said, Power Lunch starts now. Let's go to work. Welcome to another edition of Power Lunch. I'm your host, Frederick Douglass Bussey. Today's guest is none other than Ms. Kate Morgan. I said Ms. You are not a Ms., but Kate Morgan, who is, well, I'll let Kate introduce herself and share a little bit about what she does. Kate, I'm really glad to have you. Welcome to Power Lunch.
Thank you so much. So yeah, I'm the founder and entrepreneur for Boston Human Capital Partners. So I founded the company 12 years ago. And as you had mentioned, I coach founders. I'm a founder advisor. I'm an investor. But mostly what I focus on is helping grow companies.
I love it. I love it. Let's talk about you for a second, right? I love to hear the order.
I love that.
Who doesn't want to talk about themselves? But let's learn a little bit about you. Where were you born and raised? What was it like for a young Kate coming up in the world?
Oh, so it's always funny because people, when they meet me, they usually think I'm kind of a city girl. But I grew up on a farm, like a
Wow.
real farm. So small stock in Hopkinton, Massachusetts.
So, and what kind of a farm was it? Was it livestock? Was it?
Yeah, so livestock. So what they refer to as small stock. So we didn't have cows, but we had goats and sheep and chickens and all of those things.
Okay.
And so really was where my work ethic was instilled. And it's sort of an interesting balance because my father actually has a PhD in criminology and was a professor. And so highly, just a total knowledge guy. My mother has a master's, but yet here they wanted to have a farm as well.
So very interesting. I always find it interesting when you have professional people that have these, I don't want to call it old world, but these very natural or agricultural aspirations, things of that nature, working with your hands and things like that. So it's fascinating. Did you grow up in a big family or were you a single child? How was that dynamic?
Yeah, so my father had been married previously, so he had a son from that marriage, and so he was 13 years older than I was. And then I have a full-time brother, or full-time, a full brother who's 3 years older than I am, and he's a professor at Yale, actually.
Okay, so you were the youngest, pulling up the ranks as the only girl. And
Yeah, and also with the least education. So I'm a
really,
college, yeah, much to the chagrin of my overeducated family, I dropped out of college.
oh wow. So I'm curious. I always like to ask if entrepreneurship was a path that you felt like you pursued, but the fact that you dropped out of college might be a hint. The fact that you grew up on a farm might be a hint. But when you were growing up, did you ever see yourself becoming an entrepreneur and doing some of the things or anything resembling what you're doing today?
Oh my God, yeah. I started when I was in second grade, I started my
Mhm.
own newspaper. And
Wow.
yeah, and I would even pay my mother to type up the pages for me. So yeah, I've always been super industrious. So it
Wow.
was no surprise. I think if anything, there was more surprise that I waited so long to launch my company.
What was the newspaper about? How did you sell newspapers in
Yeah, I so basically it was all about animals because little girls, they love animals and ponies. So we had a comic strip, we had op-ed pieces. Yeah, so it was fun.
I love it. I love it. So, and what did you study when you went to college?
Interior design, which was pretty useless. I mean, my houses look nice, but I still pay designers to come in and help with the actual design.
Right. So what was the impetus for you dropping out of college? Did you drop out to start your first business, or what was that whole
No,
process like?
when I was in school, it was the recession of the early 90s,
Mm,
and I there was just going to be no money. And so I was
mhm,
running out of money to pay for school, and I wasn't, really committed to it. So I just decided to put it on pause. I'm a bit of a nonconformist as well, so that really probably helped convince me to break free of going to school. I really wanted
mhm,
to work. So, and at that time, I was actually working as a veterinarian technician to pay my bills. And I
hmm.
was like, well, this is fun. I'll do this. And so I was a vet tech for almost 5 years.
Wow. And so, how did you get started with your first business? How did that idea come about?
So there's been a lot of iterations to who I am. So I think there's a great book. I always recommend it to people. It's called Range, and it's by Dave Epstein. And
Mm,
it talks about, like, if you fall into a lot of different career paths, it actually can help broaden your experience and make you
mm,
actually a better person. Just having different perspectives. And so um, I landed in a lot of different things, and eventually I was part of a company that would put project teams together for Lotus back in, I guess, the late 90s. And that's where I got a real deep technical understanding as well as understanding team dynamics. And
mm,
so I used that, and eventually I became an independent consultant. And during the recession of 2008, I actually ended up oversubscribed with work. And after a few years, I just decided, you know what, I'm just going to replicate myself because I didn't
mm.
feel comfortable referring a lot of my business to people who I didn't think were quite as capable.
I like to talk about the inner game that happens when you become an entrepreneur, right? And so it sounds like you're straddling the fence a little bit. You started consulting and then you gradually built it, or did you just jump out with and got both feet wet and it just grew from there? Like, what was that process like?
Yeah. So well, it's actually funny. I was actually kind of thinking of doing a different business. And I had a CEO who I had done a lot of work with, and I reached out to him. I told him I was actually thinking about doing something that was really to address the food deserts within inner cities. So
Mm,
think of like Home Chef or HelloFresh, but for marginalized people. And
mm,
I talked to the CEO, and I told him my idea, and he said, "Kate, what do you know about the food industry? And I was like, I nothing. And he goes, here's a tip. If you're going to go into business, understand the business, know what the business is first. And within a month, I went from building out this really elaborate business plan, doing this food thing, to flipping the script and then focusing 100% on building a consulting practice.
So, and when you got your first, well, I'd like to know how you got your first contract. How did that go?
Yeah, that was it. So I remember going in and, when you're a consulting firm, the big thing is, everybody wants you to work with you specifically. And so when I went in, I was invited in, I was referred in. And so I just started talking about like there's a whole group of us. And so I said, well, what we do, and I laid out the process and everything. And then I quickly turned around and hired a contractor to fill that need. I'll admit I was fortunate, because I think we kind of duct taped and used popsicle sticks at the beginning, but I have a high standard and I hold people to high standards. And, I just remember sending my first contractor in to work with this client. And I told him, I was like, all right, good luck, make me proud. Because I didn't really know what to say, right? There's immense amount of trust. And this is kind of one of the things that frustrates me with how employees are thinking of companies right now. Like there's been this weird shift. And as an entrepreneur, particularly a founding CEO, you really have to learn to trust people. And that's actually one of our core values that in my company, I'll hire and fire too. So if I don't feel I can trust you, you're going to be let go.
Right. I think that's an interesting dynamic because right now what we're seeing is there's a lot of mistrust, right? On both sides. Employees don't really trust their employers to have their best interests at heart, to be doing the best thing in the world. I mean, there's a mix of that. And then I do find a lot of CEOs and founders who are very skeptical of their people. They're very distrustful of them, of human nature in general. They kind of see their employees more as a liability than an asset, right? And I don't even say less than human, but there's a lack of factoring in the human aspect, of being a person, right? So it's not just when you hire a person, you're hiring all of them, even though you only want the part of them that's going to do the work, right?
Yep.
And so managing, I find that when I'm working with my team, right, there's a lot of conversations that are personal that don't necessarily feel, okay, some founders might feel like this is a waste of my time because I'd really rather be focused on the business. But how could you speak to balancing that, right? Because if you're working with the entire person, there's that aspect of it. How do you balance the fact that I need to empower my people to do better, but at the same time, I have an expectation that they're going to be here focused on work?
So it's sort of two-part response. So if you are an authentic leader and you're sincere and you practice servant leadership, that sets your pace. For your team, if you hire and fire to core values, you develop a more meaningful team. So if you can provide, I think a lot of people are a little lost right now. They feel a little lost because I don't know if they weren't given enough purpose as children, right? So
talk about that a little bit. What would that look like?
Oh, a little bit? Oh my God, I can say a lot about it. And I always laugh. So I get asked to go in and present to college students. Well, my daughter's a college student right now.
Mhm.
And so I always lead off with, listen, you guys are in a very fortunate position right now. I make my daughter pay a third of her school, and she's out in Seattle at UW, so I'm paying out of state. She pays a third of it. Yet I paid cash for my Jaguar. And they're always like, oh my God. And it's like, well, yeah, but you know what? I talked to my daughter. She's self-funded trip to Paris and London right now. And she's talking about how proud she is about being able to provide for herself. She's worked 20 hours a week, even with a full class load this entire time. So when you have that sense of purpose, it creates this self-fulfilling drive. You want to do more. You want to feel good about the work you're doing.
Mhm.
I think people have lost that.
Mhm. And I would agree with you. Not to plug my book, but when I was writing my book, I discovered a piece that was even missing for myself, right? So you've heard of The Purpose Driven Life by now the name skips my mind, but everybody sold 20 million books, right? 20 million copies or more. It's one of the best-selling books of all time. And when I read that book, it was really powerful. But what I discovered the missing piece was that people aren't taught to discover their purpose. They're taught to create one, right? And so, but whether you're chasing it, pursuing it, building it, or believe that it's innate, if you don't have one, you're kind of drifting. And so I think for a founder, it turns into, I have to instill purpose into people. That's hard to do. When people think their purpose is just to keep their job and make money, and your purpose as a founder is to build this massive vehicle for value, impact, whatever, and wealth. That's a challenging thing as we're bumping heads, right? So, can you kind of speak to that aspect of it? I completely interrupted your answer on the other half, but
No, it's all good. I think, as leaders, you really have to be very careful about who you hire. So I tell my team, anybody that joins my company, the first 2 years, they're going to work harder than they ever have worked before. And when we have that conversation, and 6 months down the line, they're starting to waver. We have like kind of a clear cutoff, because after 6 months, expectations start to rise because I pay 3% on their 401k. It's not a match. I just automatically. So it's essentially automatically getting a 3% raise. And so needless to say, my expectations are going to go up in preparation for this. So, and that's when people start feeling uncomfortable. The ones that persevere and push through it, I tell them, after 2 years, this job will become super easy, because what they're doing is they're trying to learn while they're also working. So talk about on-the-job training. Well, it's really like getting a master's. They're going to learn so much about business that they would have never crossed in any other job.
Right. Well, can you talk a little bit about why that happens? I think, especially in terms of education, right? The way that our educational system kind of runs is counterintuitive to how it actually happens in business, right? Because in education, you learn first, and then they train you for the job that you're going to do. In business, you have to figure out the job you're going to do, and then educate yourself on that process. What is that like? As you see, and you're observing these entrepreneurs, these founders, even people on your team, right? What is that process like for you? What are you discovering as you observe and try to lead them through that?
I think, well, so we use a lot of assessments. So we have a behaviors and motivators assessment, and that really actually helps, because right out of the gate, I'll know what kind of person they are. There are people who have anxieties about trying something without knowing the full story. And that makes for a challenge, because our approach, we have a process, we have a methodology that you can follow, but at the end of the day, in my business, we're a consulting firm about human capital. So our product is essentially has a personality. And so anything, like, it's learning on the fly on how to deal with those people, not only the candidates that they're working with, but the clients. So that's sort of, I think it's what attracts people to our industry, because it isn't about, like, when people say, oh, I want to go into recruiting because I like people. That's exactly why you shouldn't go into recruiting, because it is more of a sales process than anything else.
I want to pull on that thread a little bit. Talk a little bit more about that differentiation and why people may struggle or find it to be more of an obstacle than they anticipating.
Because I don't think that they've been pushed outside of their comfort zone. If you're not pushed outside of your comfort zone every day, then those things get more and more uncomfortable. We hear a lot about people struggling with anxiety. Anxiety is interesting because everybody feels anxious, but we talk about when my team feels anxious, or even my daughter feels anxious, the body does not recognize the difference between excitement and anxiety physiologically. So my whole thing is, are you anxious or are you excited? Talk about it in terms of excitement, and then your mind suddenly becomes so much more open to things.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. The way that we frame things or tell the story has a lot to do with how we experience it. That's really, really good. You're getting comments here talking about how much they're enjoying your nuggets, Kate.
Oh, good.
So I'm curious, because you're in an industry, right? Consulting has become a very popular thing these days. And so a lot of people are trying to build those types of businesses. My son is coming in to ask me a question during the podcast. Hold on one second. So I want to ask you about the process. Just wait. Okay, now you're left. I want to ask you about consulting in terms of this specific type of business, right? What are some common misconceptions that people have about it? And what have you found to be one of the key factors in your being able to build a successful consulting business?
So the biggest challenge with consulting firms, like right out of the gate, so there's some basic things that people think. So you can have a very, very strong EBITDA with a consulting firm. There's no product overhead supply issue. There's nothing like that. But it also means that it's very hard to sell with any sort of valuation that you think you could actually retire from. So you have to, from the beginning, so regardless, your consulting firm should be built on more than you. A big shortcoming is when people take their name and they make it into part of the corporation. That renders it useless. You're never going to get out from underneath it.
Right.
For me, I look at it from the perspective of, okay, you have to have a playbook. Consulting firms, you can't do it ad hoc. You have to have a playbook. So that recipe for your success also becomes your sales technique. And so we covet that. That's our bread and butter. Then slotting people in that have those core values that can ensure their success in regardless of the situation is a big one. I also practice the 80-20% rule. So in consulting, 80% of your clients are going to be awesome. The other 20%, they're not going to be worth it. So fire.
So always be in the process of firing your your poorer clients, your poor performing clients, and then always be focusing on that. I love that nuggets, and I think what's interesting about it is that you have been able to navigate that. Where Talk a little bit about some of the failures or challenges that you had in the process, because it couldn't have been a smooth sailing, easy boat all the time, right? Um, we like to show the highlight reels on social media, but rarely do they see the long nights or the frustration and pulling out your hair. Looks like your hair is growing back if you had to pull it. But
Yeah. So sometimes, I'm really hard on myself.
mm,
So I have failures weekly, right? These are little blips where at night you have the DVR going in your head and you're like, "Ugh, I could have done that better." I think the big piece that if I could do it over again, I probably would. I would have brought in somebody to lead operations earlier,
mm,
because that sort of stunted my growth. I also rely heavily on a business consultant. And if I brought in a business consultant sooner, I think that would have helped set me up for less bumps in the road. Um,
mm,
so you want like a juicy story. So I had a situation that really wore heavily on me. I can't go into details, legal situation, but it was the first time that I was seeing a situation that could have gone to a legal ramification, and I lost a lot of sleep over it. Also lost a
mm,
lot of revenue over it. Matter of fact, I lost 18% revenue that year because
wow.
it caused me enough. Um, it caused me enough concern that I lost track of really why I was doing this.
Mm,
And so I needed somebody to kind of pull me up. And that's when I brought my business consultant in, and we grew 27% that year.
mm.
So really helped to reestablish the purpose of the company and pull us through, get our mind out of that. Because here's an interesting fact. It's not my fact. I find it fascinating though, is the number one profession for sociopaths is being an executive, right? And
Mhm,
the reason why that is simply because they can remove all emotion from
mhm,
how they operate.
mhm,
And I was having trouble doing that. Moving forward, once we got into COVID, COVID, I had to make some really tough decisions.
mhm.
And I came out with a mantra because it made it a little easier to make those tough decisions where I just said, this is for the fidelity of the company.
Mhm.
And when I can say that, then it legitimizes a lot of those tougher decisions.
You said a couple of interesting things that I'd like to tap into a little bit deeper. One, it's interesting, of course, because you run a consulting agency, but you said that one of your biggest regrets was not hiring a business consultant sooner. Talk a
Mhm.
little bit about why that decision was so beneficial for you, specifically allowing you to be able to grow. And then I have another question about something else that you shared.
So the thing that a business consultant can do for you is extract the anxiety out of the decisions. So
Mhm,
a good one is going to put a spotlight on the holes that they see and
mhm,
then help you figure out how to fix that. And
mhm.
it doesn't feel like it's a burden because unfortunately, as founders, CEOs, and if you're the sole founder, everything falls on your shoulders.
Right.
That gets tedious. It gets
Mhm.
really tedious.
It's a lot. It's a heavy load to bear, and I don't think a lot of people realize the toll that happens when you're in a company with other people. You have a team, but you can't have those conversations with everybody else on your team, right? There's things you can't say, there's emotions you can't express, there's details you can't share. And so because of that, if it's locked inside you, all the other thoughts and all the other emotions are kind of swirling around with you. And so all those other emotions around inside with you. The beauty of doing a live show. So you kind of have to juggle those things and navigate all that stuff that's happening, right? But having someone that you can kind of lean on for that, and whether you have to having to pay them as well, can kind of emphasize the fact that this is a real investment in yourself, I think. And I see that in my own business as well. The other thing I wanted to talk about, though, because you mentioned the interesting fact about the sociopaths being acceptable, right? And this kind of leads to some of the work you do with building culture in teams, I think, because oftentimes what we see is we find these sensational stories about the CEOs acting badly and things that they do, right? They were on a jet somewhere and there was abuse, or there was some sort of inappropriate behavior, or whatever the case may be. Talk a little bit about how we reward sociopathic behavior, how certain people can get accelerated because of their mindset and their performance, and it kind of enables them in some regard. And then how do you weed that out? Find those who can perform at a high level, but also navigate weeding out that culture, because there's a lot of toxic mindset, a lot of toxic behaviors, a lot of stuff that's kind of seeped into corporate culture overall. Whether you're a startup, a new startup, or whatever the case may be, at a certain point, there's certain things that feel like they're almost baked in. How do you come in and shift that thinking, shift some of those things that happen, whether it's from the leadership standpoint or from the corporate culture standpoint as well?
Well, so it's kind of funny, right? So when we look at company cultures, they're as broad as there are personalities, because it's basically subscribing a personality to a company. Mm-hmm. So if you look in that perspective, hey, there's somebody for everyone. So maybe you have a more aggressive culture. We have a team of the nicest, wholesome people, but they're so driven that anybody that comes on board, they're going to hold them to a high standard as well. So I don't necessarily believe, and actually the case of, we're seeing a lot of executives exhibiting bad behavior. I got to tell you, should have been around there in the 90s, because holy crap. God, Lotus was like Caligula, there was so much going on over there. Yeah. So maybe that's the culture that they want. Work hard, play hard. We've heard that. So it really boils down to what you want to see from your culture. And the way we did it for my company internally, we flipped the script on our team. My team now, because particularly with COVID, it helped us really enforce those core values, and we could take our time sort of rebuilding. And so when culture shouldn't be aspirational, just like core values shouldn't be aspirational. So when you look at the core values, you take the same values you really embrace, and you look for those commonalities within the team, your star performers. And that's what you want to replicate. I do believe that you can teach a lot of skills, but you can't really teach core values unless they're wholeheartedly embracing them.
You talk about core values. Companies talk about core values. Leaders talk about them. But can we be honest about it, right? A lot of people say they believe in one thing, but they do another. So can you talk about why there is this line of demarcation between what we do and what we say are going to do, or what we say we do, right? And then how do you actually make the two become one, right? How do you actually create that value integrity in your business?
So I like how you phrase it, value integrity, because that really is what it is. But that's, again, if you're like, hey, I want, a core value of work hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something lame or something. I mean, usually, like, I can go in, and when people talk about their core values, I can peg within 5 minutes if they've just basically chosen a bunch of descriptors, a bunch of adjectives that they thought, well, this sounds really good.
Mm-hmm.
No, you have to, and you, like, even our performance improvement plans that I have within my own company, those PIPs are based on the core values.
Yeah.
So for ours, we have 5, and if they lag on any one of them, I know it, I see it, I feel it, and then it's something that I can work on to correct. If they don't want to be corrected, well, then they're going to be left behind.
Yeah, we're working on our reframing our core values here, and I
Do
think
you have
that's
a
really
favorite?
a favorite core value.
Yeah.
Um, that's a really good question. As I'm going through it, right? Purpose is one that's really really powerful for me, because my goal is to always live on purpose, and in my purpose, and I want everyone on my team to be doing that as well. I feel that if we are all aligned with our purpose and our purposes are aligned, the company is going to be much more efficient and impactful, right? Because everyone is doing what they were designed and created to do. That's more effortless. It's like a flock of geese, right? You're able to go longer and further and higher because you're all aligned in what you're doing. Now, if we had some ducks and geese and an eagle and some hawks and some buzzards, it's rare that you, like I say, birds of a feather flock together, right? Well, that's because there's alignment in what you're doing and your purpose. So I think that would probably be my favorite. What about you? What's one of your favorites with your company?
So I love them all, quite frankly.
That's good.
They kind of dovetail into one another. The one that I think has served me the most is trust.
Mm,
So when we talk about trust, it's like, I don't think somebody's going to be robbing me, but I trust that when they're struggling, when they're feeling insecure, when they have doubt, in me, that they're going to put up their hand, because
mm,
I can't do anything without having an open, trustful relationship.
mm,
When you trust people, you can take criticism.
right.
If you don't trust people, I can't take criticism, and the person I'm talking to, they can't take criticism. So
Mm,
when you have that level of trust, then you can help build people. The core value that we have that I think is the hardest to maintain,
mm,
is awareness of the moment. So
mm,
awareness. So I'm in a situation where I'm moving to an ESOP program for my team. And so
mm,
we're really working on having an entrepreneurial mindset.
mm,
And that is something that I work with my team on. And it can be just awareness of the market, understanding that the stock market isn't really, the stock market is I think a lot of pedestrians just look at that and say, oh, that means that the economy is, but no, the stock market is a scared little bird and reactionary to everything.
right.
So
Right.
look at those 3 elements, that really actually indicate where inflation and your consumer product index, all of those pieces, 10-year bonds. Those are the things that actually you have to be aware of. So don't look at things at face value, but really be aware of how everything interconnects.
Oh, that's really good. I wasn't expecting you to go in that direction. I, but I think in light of everything that's happened recently with Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, Credit Suisse being bought by UBS, right? There's a lot of stuff that's out there. I was just listening to a podcast. We're talking about this real examination of the banking structure and the financial markets, the economic conditions really globally, that there's a lot of stuff that's interconnected. A lot of people have a lot of fear. You're talking about trust. If you were consulting the head of a large bank right now, whether a mid-sized regional bank or a global bank, what are some of the things that you would be telling them and their team to instill trust within the company and from those who are either interacting with it or looking onto the market in general?
Well, first I want to talk to their risk officer because I
Hopefully
think
they still have one.
I was going to say, well, SVB did not. Their
Right.
risk, had left, and it was funny because I had a friend who is a former Wall Street banker, and
Mhm.
she was over that Sunday that weekend, and we were talking about it, and she's like, "Yeah, word on the street was that person was gone, had to quit." So there's a little flag.
Mm.
Yeah, I think there needs to be more transparency.
Yeah.
So again, if you're an authentic leader and you aren't leading with, that's kind of a rub, right? Is if you're a sociopath, how do you express empathy without making it look, you know, not sincere? So if you're insincere about authenticity, then what you need to do is rely on data. Data becomes king.
Right.
So be transparent, not necessarily with your character, because maybe it's off-putting. We look at Elon Musk right now. He's incredibly off-putting.
Mhm.
If he led
personal level, right?
Yeah, if he led with true actual data without the weirdness, I think he would instill a lot more faith in the public and his team.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. That's a great point because he is, in his mind, Twitter is another company. He's running it like a company, right? He's running it like Tesla, but Tesla and SpaceX are scientific, technological companies. So which product? It makes sense to say we're going to build it like this. It's not ready yet. I'm going to get rid of the people who aren't performing on it. Twitter feels like almost like a human experiment, right? People feel an ownership in it, whether they work there or not. And so a lot of the reflection of it feels like, oh, it's this happy go lucky, good vibe sort of story, and you make a great point that leaders have to be cognizant and self-aware. And I think, when we're talking about consultants, having people that come in, they give you that, not just the cover, but they give you some of that self-awareness. So maybe your leaders, they have to learn to outsource some of that awareness, right? It's like buying a mirror. Buy a freaking mirror. So you can see what you look like before you go out, you step outside.
Well, and even to that, being even founders of smaller companies, it blew my mind. This was a few years back that I had said something to somebody and like it was an offhand joke, didn't even think about it. And later, like 2 years later, they brought up my comment. And it was just supposed to be sort of funny. And we have to be super, super careful all the time with what we're saying, how we're saying it. It can be suddenly offensive. Think of like we're all on some level emotionally scarred from our parents, right? Or at least we feel emotionally scarred. And one person's scarring may be deeper than somebody else's. But it may have been something that our parents said, and then it became riveted in our belief structure. And that we have to be super careful with as leaders.
Right. I talk a little bit about some of the work that maybe you've had to do, because you make a great point in that we don't know what we don't know. And a lot of beliefs are invisible to us, right? So that's just how they see the world. But if you have a belief that is based on something that's faulty, that happened years ago, you're not aware of the fact that it's faulty because to you, that's how it happened. But as a leader, sometimes you have to do the work to excavate some of those things. Have you had to go through some of that process yourself? Because I would imagine just having a business alone makes you have to examine things if you're ever going to be successful.
Well, for me personally, you know, I could walk away from having a team. I could be an independent consultant again. So I'm very careful with, and we talked about earlier, purpose. So my purpose is actually to be here to create people's careers. Yeah, there's no degree for talent acquisition consulting. So I'm going to build the best team possible, and I want them to go on and do great things. So in order to do that, I have to have, again, that trust and authenticity. So we have a team call every morning, and I embrace being roasted. Like if my team can roast me, then I know for sure that we're in a good place. They feel that they can speak their concerns. And I always hope that they can do that.
That's really good. That is a good indicator of the trust factor, right? The safety that you create in an environment. I wanted to ask you about the talent acquisition piece, lastly. But before I do that, there's a question in the comments from someone. It's a long question, but I'm going to condense it. Basically, they have a struggling business, but they still have a 9-to-5 as well. And so they're trying to decide when they should quit. They believe that if they go 100%, they can get the business to scale, but they're trying to consider what or when they should make that transition, and they want to do it now, right? That's really what they want to do. What would be your advice to that person?
So if I'm catching it correctly, so transition out of full-time operation.
Transition out of their 9-to-5 into the business full-time because they believe they can scale the business faster if they could not be doing both.
No, so I don't get, because I coach a lot of student entrepreneurs too. You'll never be able to do it. If you're fearful, that's an indicator that you're not ready. If you have your process down, your storyline down, and you're fearless, then you do it. And actually coming into a weaker market actually can be a better time to start a company because you can kind of fail safely as you build your business. But trying to work a 9-to-5 and also found a business, it's tough. It's really, really tough.
Yeah. What my son decided to come in one last time. Come here, son. Come say hi to everybody.
Hey there.
You're done with your work for now?
I did 13 lessons.
13 lessons. All right, good job. You can take a break. It's almost time for lunch. Well, so that being said, I think you've given us a ton of value here as we're getting ready to wrap up. I wanted to ask you about the talent acquisition piece, because you talk to just about any leader or founder. They're always talking about the challenge of finding great talent. You know, I call it 1% talent. If you want to build a 1% business, you need 1% talent. What is one or two of the key elements or ingredients for being able to attract 1% talent?
So there's really no attracting. You have to look at it in a little different way. So we do talk about sort of attracting or repelling the people you don't want, but in our market, it's still very hard to find really good people. You have to be ready. You have to go out and hunt. If you can't, spend the time to do it, then hire a talent acquisition consultant to be going out and really finding those people. Resumes are cute, but I don't even personally want a job description. So I tell, and all my clients get excited. I don't have to write a job description. We want something so we can put it up for sure. But honestly, tell me what you need this person to do the next 3 to 12 months, because then I have a story not only to tell them, which will attract them, but also I'll understand if I know they have the abilities and the background experience to jump in. So that's kind of how we look at it. Is it is a two-way street. Give them the best. Do not embellish your organization. Don't embellish your culture. I think people tend to do that. That's why I always will wedge ourselves in between the candidate and the client. Again, we work on an hourly basis. We're not commissioned. So I want that person to know fully what to expect. Companies, warts and all, my company is not perfect. That's why even personally, I'm like, this is what you have to expect. We just upped our interview process because we're like, you know what? We don't want people to come here and be unhappy and then 6 months leave. I have people that have worked for me for 10 and a half years. That's what I want. And we can only do that if we really put the interview process through, put them through the I don't want to say ringer because that sounds like it's, but we amp up the intensity to match the intensity of our environment.
I love that. It brings to mind the phrase radical candor, right? A lot of people are trying to give this sales pitch that's a really glossy Super Bowl ad, and then you get there and it's a natural disaster, right?
Yeah.
Steve Jobs is infamous or famous for his unique hiring style, right? Interviews. I think Jeff Bezos has a similar type of reputation. And you mentioned your interview process. Is there a particular question, a quiz, or something that you put people through? There's something that you ask for, and I'd love to hear what that may be and what it is that you're trying to uncover by asking that question or giving them this project or task.
So, and my team cracks me up because they talk about how my interview style is not interview like, and that's by design, because that radical candor piece, it's all about really understanding who I am. So what I usually do is, I'll ask them a few questions and then I say, you know what? And by this time I should state that they've gone through 2 other interviews.
Right.
So my whole goal is to disarm them. So I just simply ask me anything. And for me, that's really telling. Do they have the chutzpah to ask me tough questions? Are they asking me smart questions and questions that engage me? That's what I want to see.
What was one of the smartest or most challenging questions that you ever got from a candidate?
I think they all tend to err on, sort of, they're a little bit more hesitant at first, but I do get a lot of questions about being a female entrepreneur. And that I love because, and I actually just had this as a LinkedIn post, because I get it even like when I'm talking to students, they'll ask me about it. Well, the way I look at, I'm an entrepreneur. I didn't realize people would discredit me because I have boobs. It's like, I just thought they didn't like me because of my strong personality. I have opinions. I come in, I kick the door down like the old Wild West. So I love when people ask me that question in the interview process, because then they're going to see exactly who they're talking to, because I've never let anything get me down, particularly my gender.
I was going to I was going to wrap after this, but you brought up a great point. And so I'm curious also about, I won't call it a challenge, right? But the experience of navigating that. Have you found something uniquely and specifically that you didn't expect to have to come up against because you were a woman entrepreneur, a woman founder?
No, because I thought I had too many other things racked up against me, like gender is like, I don't have a degree,
Mhm.
there's, I was a single mom, like I've had to deal with a lot of other challenges.
Mhm.
I'm not going to have my gender be a cop out. And I feel
Mhm.
a little bit like people may use those things to give an excuse. I don't have excuses. I'm going to charge through. It's going to make me work harder. You don't like me because all right. I'll give you 5 other reasons why not to like me.
That can just be one. So put that on the list. Well, I can't think about anyone wouldn't like you, Kate, because I think you're incredible. I think you've shared a ton of wisdom and insight with us. That's been really helpful for those who've been watching. Let people know where they can get in contact with you, how they can connect with you if they want to work with you or your team to be able to grow their business as well.
Absolutely. So by email, of course, kmorgan@bostonhcp.com. We don't spend a lot on our website because all the work we do is referral based, but LinkedIn as well. So I'm frequently on LinkedIn. Would appreciate a like on some of our posts. That would be fantastic.
Awesome. Awesome. I want to appreciate you and share some gratitude with you for coming on and sharing this hour with us. I know you're very busy, and so I really appreciate everything you had to say. Um, well, you're welcome back anytime, and we
Thank
love.
you.
Awesome. And thanks to those of you who've been watching live. If you're watching this on replay, drop a hashtag replay and let us know what you're discovering. What was one of the key takeaways you got from everything that Kate had to share with us today? What do you love about her story? And make sure that you follow, like, and subscribe on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook, wherever you're watching this live now. We appreciate you. We're glad to have you here with us. And as always, I'm Frederick Douglass Bussey, ever forward.